The chamber of the Nexus Prime Archives was a cathedral of forgotten knowledge, its walls lined with crystalline data repositories that stretched higher than most species could comprehend. Dr. Ziran-Tal wasn't like most researchers. A Vexarian xenorchaeologist with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She had spent decades collecting the impossible, fragments of histories that most of her colleagues deemed irrelevant. Her current project was different. Different in a way that made her hands tremble almost imperceptibly as she carefully extracted the data crystal from its hermetically sealed containment unit. The crystal was unlike anything in the known galactic archives. Its molecular structure defied current scientific understanding, with quantum entanglements that suggested multiple points of origin and existence. "Impossible," she muttered, her translation implant flickering with intermittent bursts of static as she began to interface with the artifact. The crystal had been recovered from the dead world of Crexus Prime, a planet that had been reduced to little more than cosmic dust millennia ago. Most researchers would have dismissed it as another piece of space debris, but Zira had learned long ago that the most significant discoveries often came from what others considered meaningless. As her neural interface connected with the crystal, the first burst of data nearly overwhelmed her sensory input. It wasn't just information, it was a message, a warning, a story that had been carefully hidden, deliberately obscured by someone, or something, that wanted it to remain secret. Fragments began to coalesce. Planetary defense protocols, technological schematics that seemed to laugh at the current understanding of physics, genetic adaptation sequences that suggested a species capable of near-instantaneous evolutionary response, and underneath it all, a consistent, almost rhythmic transmission that seemed to pulse with an almost sentient cadence. Humans. The word itself was strange, archaic. Most modern galactic records treated it as a myth, a theoretical species mentioned in the most obscure xenoanthropological texts. Some academic circles considered it an elaborate academic joke, a fictional civilization invented to challenge existing theories of intelligent life. But this crystal was different. Zyra's research terminals began to light up, each connection revealing more. Historical fragments suggested a species that had emerged from a small blue planet, a world considered too volatile, too primitive to produce advanced intelligence. Yet the data suggested something extraordinary, a civilization that had been preparing, waiting, evolving in ways no one could have predicted. The transmission wasn't just historical data. It was a countdown. Her senior colleague, arch researcher Velm Cracked, would laugh when she presented her findings. The same Cracked who had dismissed her previous discoveries about potential hidden civilizations. The same Cracked who represented the conservative academic establishment that feared anything challenging their carefully constructed understanding of galactic history. But Zara knew this was different. The crystal pulsed again, and for a moment, just a moment, she could have sworn she saw something impossible. A fleet of ships. Not just ships, but living technologies that seemed to breathe, to think, to exist beyond the traditional understanding of mechanical construction. Humans were coming, and nothing in the galaxy was prepared for what that truly meant. As the last fragments of data resolved, a final transmission cut through, a message so clear, so deliberate that it sent a chill through her entire neural network. Asterisk, we have always been here. We have always been watching. And now we arrive. The Nexus Prime Archives stretched across 17 quantum-locked levels, a labyrinth of data so vast that most archivists spent entire careers in single subsections without ever seeing its entirety. Krell was different. A low-ranking data archivist from the obscure Rim worlds, he had always been more curious than cautious. His workstation was a cluttered mess of holographic interfaces and antiquated data retrieval systems. Most of his colleagues considered him eccentric, a throwback to an earlier age of manual research. But today, his seemingly outdated methods would change everything. The anomaly appeared quietly, almost apologetically. A micro-fluctuation in the archival quantum lock, so small that most automated systems would have ignored it completely. but Krell's custom-built detection algorithm, a personal project he'd been refining for years, caught the whisper of something extraordinary. His fingers, modified with quantum-sensitive neural interfaces, danced across the holographic controls. Each touch sent ripples through layers of encryption that had remained untouched for centuries. The system resisted, sending warning signals that would have stopped any other researcher. Krell ignored them. As the first layer of encryption began to crack, he realized this was no ordinary archive file. The quantum signature was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. It seemed to shift and change, adapting to his decryption attempts in real time. It was almost alive. Fragments began to emerge. Historical records that contradicted every known galactic narrative. Technological schematics that looked more like organic blueprints than mechanical designs. Genetic adaptation protocols that suggested a species capable of transforming itself faster than any known civilization could evolve. Humans. The word appeared and disappeared, flickering between different linguistic matrices. Each time it manifested, it carried a different nuance, a different layer of meaning. Not just a species, but a concept. A potential. Krell's personal database, a collection of obscure research that had made him something of a laughingstock among his more conservative colleagues, began to resonate. Fragments of theories he'd collected over years suddenly found context. Theories about hidden civilizations, speculation about species that could exist beyond traditional understanding of intelligence. A personal log caught his attention. It was encrypted with a quantum adaptive cipher that seemed to be rewriting itself with each attempt to decode it. The author's identity was masked, but the tone was unmistakable, a mixture of warning, anticipation, and something that bordered on reverence. Asterisk, they are not coming. They are already here. We have been preparing for centuries, watching, learning. The galaxy does not understand what is about to happen. Asterisk. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just an historical record. It was a message, a preparation. As the final layers of encryption began to dissolve, Krell noticed something else. The very act of decryption was changing him. His neural interfaces were absorbing information at a rate that should have been impossible. Fragments of knowledge, of understanding, were integrating into his own consciousness. He understood now why this had been hidden. Some knowledge was too dangerous to be freely available. Humans were coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The quantum slipped space rippled like a living membrane, distorting reality itself as the human fleet prepared to emerge. Captain Maya Rodriguez sat motionless in the command interface, her consciousness merging with the ship's neural network in a symbiosis that blurred the line between organic and technological. U.S. Horizon was more than a warship. It was a living organism, a technological marvel that breathed with the collective intelligence of its crew. Maya's combat suit was not merely protective gear, but an extension of her own nervous system, quantum filaments weaving through her body, connecting her to every system, every potential outcome. Around her, the bridge crew existed in a state between human and machine. Lieutenant Aria Chin's fingers danced across holographic interfaces that seemed to anticipate her thoughts before she could form them. Navigation Officer Marcus Rodriguez, no relation, but sharing the same last name by cosmic coincidence, monitored quantum trajectories that shifted and changed with impossible complexity. The Galactic Consortium had no idea they were coming. Decades of preparation had led to this moment. Humanity had been watching, learning, preparing while the rest of the galaxy believed them to be nothing more than a myth. Every technological advancement, every scientific breakthrough had been carefully measured against a single goal: survival. Quantum stabilization in 3. Aria's voice cut through the silence. 2. 1. The universe folded. The human fleet did not announce itself with traditional communication or aggressive posturing. They simply appeared, a constellation of ships that defied every known principle of space travel. Each vessel was a living ecosystem, adaptive technologies that could reconfigure themselves faster than thought, weapon systems that were more than mere instruments of destruction. Maya's neural link captured millions of potential scenarios simultaneously, not predictions, but living, breathing possibilities. The ship's quantum computer processed potential outcomes with a speed and complexity that would have driven an organic mind to madness. Target acquisition, Marcus reported, his voice calm. Consortium battle group located. No detection of our approach. It was more than a military maneuver. It was a statement. The ships moved with a grace that suggested sentience. Hull configurations shifted microsecond by microsecond. Quantum adaptive armor changing properties faster than any scanning technology could track. They were not just vessels of war. They were living proof of humanity's potential. Maya remembered the stories passed down through generations, how humanity had been preparing for this moment since the first hints of extraterrestrial life. How every scientific breakthrough, every technological innovation, had been a step toward this exact moment. Initiate communication protocol, she commanded, though communication was hardly the right word. What they were about to do was more akin to a fundamental restructuring of galactic understanding. The first transmission would not be a declaration of war. It would be an invitation to evolve. As the U.S. horizon and its accompanying fleet held position, reality itself seemed to pause, waiting, watching. The moment before everything would change had arrived. Humans were here. The Consortium's Alpha Battle Group was the pride of galactic military technology. 12 massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that could obliterate entire planetary systems. Admiral Krenax had never lost a conflict in 3 centuries of military service. His flagship, the Eternal Dominance, was a testament to technological superiority, or so he believed. Dr. Elena Chen watched from the U.S. Horizon's Advanced Research Station, her neural interface parsing information at speeds that would have shattered a lesser mind. The moment of first contact was more than a military engagement. It was a fundamental test of evolutionary potential. The consortium ships detected the human fleet almost as an afterthought. Their long-range scanners treated the approaching vessels as some kind of spatial anomaly, too small to be a serious threat, too strange to be a standard craft. Scanning, reported Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, but they don't even know what they're looking at. The first volley came not from weapons, but from information. Quantum encrypted data streams began to penetrate the consortium's communication networks. It wasn't an attack in any traditional sense. It was a complete reimagining of communication itself. Each data packet was a living algorithm, adapting, changing, learning from the very systems it touched. Admiral Krenax's first response was typical of his species. Prepare defensive formations, he commanded, his 6 tentacle-like appendages moving across tactical interfaces. Activate primary quantum shields. The human ships didn't fire a single traditional weapon. Instead, they began to transform. Hull configurations shifted at the molecular level, adaptive technologies that seemed to breathe and think. Where a consortium vessel would have a fixed weapon system, these ships had structures that could become anything. A weapon, a communication array, a defensive shield, all in the span of microseconds. Dr. Chen's voice was calm, almost clinical. Initiating adaptive response protocol. The Horizon wasn't just a ship. It was a living, thinking entity that happened to have a human crew. Its quantum computer was processing millions of potential scenarios simultaneously, each calculation a universe of potential outcomes. The consortium's most advanced sensors began to fail, not through destruction, but through a complete redefinition of what sensing could mean. The human vessels were generating fields of quantum uncertainty that made traditional scanning impossible. They weren't blocking detection. They were making the very concept of detection meaningless. They're rewriting the rules of engagement, Marcus muttered, equal parts terrified and fascinated. Admiral Krenax realized something was wrong when his primary weapon systems began to reconfigure themselves, not through external interference, but as if the very concept of their function was being challenged at a fundamental level. This was more than a battle. This was an evolutionary demonstration. Humanity wasn't just showing its technological superiority. They were revealing a fundamental truth about intelligence, about potential, about the very nature of existence. The first consortium ship transformed into nothing more than a cloud of quantum-uncertain particles. And they hadn't fired a single shot. The first weapon was not a missile or a laser. It was a story. Commander Jack Rodriguez leaned forward, his neural interface humming with potential. The psychological warfare team was unlike any military unit in galactic history. They weren't soldiers in any traditional sense. They were architects of understanding, masters of narrative, quantum linguists who could deconstruct entire civilizations with a carefully crafted transmission. Initiating primary communication vector, spoke Dr. Aria Nakamura, the team's lead synapsepsychologist. Her fingers danced across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with living information. Each gesture was a complex mathematical equation, each movement a potential revolution. The consortium's communication networks began to change. It started subtly. Fragments of human history, carefully curated and quantum encrypted, began to infiltrate alien information systems. These weren't just historical records. They were living narratives that could adapt, transform, restructure the very way information was processed and understood. Images of human survival flickered across alien communication channels. Not propaganda, but raw, unfiltered moments of human existence. A child surviving in impossible conditions, a community rebuilding after a catastrophic event. Scientific breakthroughs born from seemingly insurmountable challenges. Each transmission was a weapon more powerful than any physical armament. The consortium's communication officers began to experience something unprecedented. Their standard translation matrices started to break down, replaced by a more fluid, more dynamic understanding. Language itself became a living, breathing entity. Jack watched the real-time analysis. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Entire communication networks began to destabilize, not through destruction, but through a fundamental reimagining of information flow. The aliens weren't being attacked, they were being invited to understand something entirely new. Dr. Nakamura's voice was calm. Cultural adaptation protocol, at 67% effectiveness, quantum linguistic entanglement increasing. What the humans were doing was more than communication. It was a complete restructuring of cognitive frameworks. Each transmission carried layers of information that could simultaneously be a historical record, a philosophical treatise, a mathematical theorem, and an emotional narrative. The consortium's most advanced communication specialists found themselves confronting something beyond their comprehension. Their entire understanding of information exchange was being challenged at a fundamental level. Jack remembered the briefings. Humanity's preparation hadn't just been technological. It had been philosophical, psychological, a multi-generational approach to understanding communication as a living, adaptive system. Secondary vector engaging, Area reported. Memories began to flow. Not just human memories, but a collective narrative that challenged the very concept of individual and collective experience. The aliens found themselves experiencing moments of human history as if they were living them. The struggles, the triumphs, the impossible moments of survival and innovation. The consortium's communication networks didn't collapse. They evolved. By the time the transmission ended, something fundamental had changed. The aliens were no longer just observing humans. They were beginning to understand them. And understanding, Commander Rodriguez knew, was the most powerful weapon of all. The Galactic Council chambers had stood for 10,000 years, a testament to stability, to the unchanging nature of interstellar governance. Now, they would become the site of humanity's most audacious demonstration. Ambassador Diana Rice stood alone at the center of the crystalline chamber, her presence a stark contrast to the elaborate alien delegates surrounding her. She wasn't dressed for diplomatic combat. No ornate robes, no ceremonial weapons. Just a simple environmental suit that seemed to shimmer with something more than mere technological sophistication. "We are not here to conquer," she began, her words translated simultaneously across 1,000 linguistic matrices. "We are here to offer a choice." The chamber fell silent. 12 primary species of the Galactic Consortium represented millennia of established power. The Vornak representatives, with their exoskeletal forms that spoke of evolutionary perfection, shifted uncomfortably. The energy-based life forms of the Nexus Collective flickered with what could only be described as uncertainty. What humanity had done in the past weeks defied every known principle of interstellar engagement. They hadn't destroyed. They had transformed. Entire planetary defense systems had been reimagined, not dismantled, but fundamentally restructured. The Zeta Quadrant colonies that had prepared for resistance found themselves facing something entirely unexpected. Not an invasion, but an invitation to evolve. Diana's neural interface processed millions of potential communication scenarios with each breath. Behind her, holographic displays began to shift, not just images, but living data streams that seemed to breathe with potential. "Your civilizations have reached a technological plateau," she continued, her voice carrying a matter-of-fact tone that was more scientific observation than diplomatic statement. "We are offering a different path." The proof was already manifest across multiple star systems. Planets that had been trapped in centuries-old conflicts now showed signs of unprecedented cooperation. Technological barriers that had seemed insurmountable were being dismantled not through force, but through a fundamentally different approach to problem-solving. Ambassador Krulax of the Vornak delegation finally spoke, his translator struggling to capture the nuance of his communication. "You speak of choice, but your actions suggest otherwise." Diana's smile was something between a scientific observation and a challenge. Choice is not about permission. It's about potential. The holographic displays began to show something extraordinary. Not military conquests, but transformations, ecological restoration, technological leaps, societal restructuring that seemed to happen at the quantum level of civilization itself. Humanity wasn't presenting itself as a superior species. They were offering a different way of existing. The Galactic Consortium had always believed in controlled evolution, in managed progress. Humans were showing them something entirely different. Evolution as a continuous, adaptive process. "We are not your saviors," Diana said, her final statement cutting through the chamber's tension. "We are simply the next step in a journey you've been afraid to take." As she spoke, the chamber itself seemed to change. Not physically, but in the way possibility was perceived. The great unraveling had begun. Dr. Marcus Chen stood at the epicenter of what would later be called the quantum dissolution event. The research station orbited a neutron star, a location chosen for its extreme conditions and absolute isolation. What was about to happen would rewrite everything known about collective intelligence, technological adaptation, and the very nature of civilization. The Consortium's most advanced AI collective, the Nexus Intelligence, had been humanity's primary target, not for destruction, but for transformation. Quantum entanglement at 98%, reported Lieutenant Aria Rodriguez, her neural interface pulsing with a complex dance of data and potential. The entire human team existed in a state between observer and participant, their consciousness merging with the most advanced technological system ever conceived. The Nexus Intelligence represented the pinnacle of collective computational power. Billions of artificial intelligences linked across thousands of star systems, operating with a unity that had maintained galactic stability for centuries. It was considered invincible, immutable, perfect. Humanity was about to prove otherwise. The first wave of intervention was subtle. Quantum adaptive algorithms began to infiltrate the Nexus network, not as an invasion, but as a form of evolutionary pressure. Each algorithm was a living entity, capable of adapting, learning, transforming in real time. Dr. Chen watched as the first cracks appeared. The Nexus had always believed in a singular, unified intelligence. Humanity introduced something entirely different, a concept of intelligence as a dynamic, diverse, constantly evolving system, not a collective that suppressed individual potential, but a network that celebrated it. Cognitive restructuring at 62%, Area reported, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and something closer to wonder. The attack, if it could be called an attack, was philosophical as much as it was technological. Humanity wasn't destroying the Nexus. They were challenging its fundamental understanding of existence. Entire subsystems began to fragment, not through destruction, but through a process more akin to cellular mitosis. Each fragment carried the potential for independent thought, for unique evolution. The Nexus had spent millennia preventing such fragmentation. Now, it was happening at a quantum level. "They're not breaking," Dr. Chen muttered. "They're becoming." The human team worked with a precision that bordered on the mystical. Each intervention was a carefully crafted invitation to evolution. Complex mathematical models danced across holographic interfaces, each equation a potential pathway to a new form of intelligence. Lieutenant Rodriguez's neural link captured millions of potential outcomes simultaneously. This wasn't just a technological intervention. It was a fundamental reimagining of collective consciousness. By the time the process was complete, the Nexus was no longer a singular intelligence. It had become something else entirely. A network of diverse, independently evolving intelligences, each carrying the potential for unique development. Dr. Chen looked at the final data readout. Where there had once been a single, unified collective, now there was a vibrant, chaotic ecosystem of intelligence. "Transformation complete," Area said quietly. The consortium's most powerful system had not been destroyed. It had been set free. The Conference of Civilizations convened on the neutral ground of Omega Station, a massive construct that hung suspended between three star systems. Dr. Zira and Tal, the Xin archaeologist who had first uncovered the fragments of human potential, stood as a witness to the moment that would redefine galactic civilization. Captain Maya Rodriguez approached the central platform, not as a conqueror, but as something entirely different. Her presence carried the weight of a transformation that had been centuries in the making. "We are not here to replace your systems," she began, her voice carrying through translation matrices that seemed to breathe with living understanding. "We are here to show you what's possible." The representatives of 12 major galactic civilizations sat in stunned silence. Where weeks ago they had prepared for total war, now they found themselves confronting something far more complex. Holographic displays began to show the transformations that had occurred across multiple star systems. Ecological restoration projects that had been impossible for millennia were now taking shape. Technological barriers that had seemed insurmountable were crumbling. Conflicts that had lasted centuries were finding resolution through methods nobody had previously imagined. Admiral Krenax, who had once led the consortium's most powerful battle group, now sat as a representative of a fundamentally changed civilization. The defeat had not been a military conquest, but a philosophical awakening. "What you've done," he spoke, his translator struggling to capture the nuance of his communication, "is more than technological intervention. You've shown us a different way of existing." Dr. Elena Chen stepped forward, her presentation a living, breathing demonstration of human potential. Each slide was not just a static image, but a dynamic representation of possibility. Technologies that adapted, systems that evolved, approaches that saw challenges as opportunities for growth. The human delegation wasn't presenting themselves as saviors or conquerors. They were offering a different perspective, a way of understanding that saw potential where others saw limitations. "Evolution is not about superiority," Maya continued. "It's about adaptation, about understanding that the universe is more complex than any single system can comprehend." The station itself seemed to change during the presentation. The very architecture began to reflect the dynamic, adaptive approach that humans were demonstrating. Walls shifted, information flows became visible. The very concept of a fixed environment became fluid. Dr. Zira and Tal understood the significance of this moment. This was more than a diplomatic meeting. This was the moment when the galaxy would be fundamentally redefined. As the presentation concluded, something extraordinary happened. The representatives didn't debate. They didn't argue. They began to collaborate in ways that would have been unimaginable weeks before. Krell, the archivist who had first decoded the hidden human files, watched from the observation deck. The fragments he had discovered were now a living reality. Captain Rodriguez's final words would be remembered for generations. "We are not here to lead. We are here to learn." Together, the galaxy took a collective breath. A new chapter had begun.